All right, today we're going to take a look at Lesson 5, Mastering the Essentials of Video Editing. In this lesson, you will learn how to do the following: work with clips in Source Monitor, create sequences, use essential editing commands, view timecode, and understand tracks. So if you go ahead and open up Lesson 5 file, you may have to go through and relink the files. Once we have that set, we're going to go ahead and do a file save as. And let's just go ahead and we can leave this in the lessons folder. We're going to call this Lesson 5 Working. Go ahead and click Save. Now, if you actually close this and reopen it, you wouldn't have the same issues with the linked files. As we get working, we're going to go ahead and use our editing option at the top. So as we go through and use that, we may want to go ahead and reset to saved layout. And in here, we're going to actually begin learning more about how do we go in and work with the source monitor, what are the controls in the source monitor, and how we can ultimately go in here and add in and out points to this so that we can take that information then and begin to work with our timeline and our sequences. Now, if we go and we start talking about our source monitor is the main place in which you're going to go when you want to actually check on your assets, review assets before going in and adding them into any sequence. When you actually open up the video clips inside of the source monitor, this allows us to see them in their original format. So frame rate, frame size, field order, audio sample rate, and even audio bit depth are exactly as they were recorded, unless, of course, you did interpret footage like we did in lesson number 4. However, when we add a clip to the sequence, we take it from the source and we place it inside of the sequence, Premiere Pro is going to actually conform it to whatever those sequence settings are. Now, if we go through and we create it from an individual file, then it's going to form the sequence settings to match up with that source document. The other thing we have up here inside of our source monitor is the ability to go in and add in markers. So we start thinking about markers. It could have chapter markers, but the two main ones that we're actually going to focus on is using our in points and our out points, which allow us to ultimately select what part of a clip do we want to include inside of the sequence. So as we go into load a clip into the source monitor, there's a few different ways that we can go through and we can do that. So if we come down into our project panel, down here we're going to see that we have our theft unexpected bin. I'm going to go ahead and toggle that open just to see what is inside of there. So if we go and we look at it, we were able to go in and select a file. Now, if you wanted to simply open this bin so it had its own tab at the top of this panel, we could also go ahead and hold down Command as we go in and click on it as well. As we go through, navigate through, decide what it is that we want to go and work with. The other thing we can also do is we can go ahead and close this up by simply clicking back on the disclosure arrow. But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and get into and working with this red video .red or R3D file. So if we go ahead and grab this and double click onto it, it should open up inside of your source monitor. Alternatively, you could also grab that file inside of the project panel and drag it up and drop it inside of the source monitor to view it as well. Now, if we come up over top of this, if we go ahead and hit the accent key or grave key, that's going to be the key just to the left of the 1 on the keyboard above the tab below escape. If you go ahead and select that, it's going to maximize the panel. Now, if you don't know where the graves key is at, you can also simply come up here to the tab at the top for the source monitor and click on it. It will also toggle this into a full screen mode. So we start looking at using monitors. Now, depending on what your setup is, if you have dual displays as a setup inside of the MacLab, we can go ahead and control the fact of what we're seeing on our secondary display. So as of right now, what we're seeing on the main display is the Premiere Pro workspace. And if you could view my second screen right now, you would see that what we have going on over there is it's showing us exactly what's in the program monitor. So if we come into our Premiere Pro preferences and we come down here to playback, you'll see here we have the options as to where are we going to show this. If we wanted to use a different display, if you have a large TV set up to it and it shows up in here, we can select that so we're actually seeing playback on that individual monitor. Now, there's some advantages to doing this. Of course, if we're going to output it to that monitor, we're going to see what's going to happen with the overscan. If you don't want that playing on one, you can actually uncheck that and go ahead and click on OK at this point. And then your secondary display is just simply going to show the desktop or whatever else is on there. How you choose to run this is up to you. If you want to leave it on in the classroom, it's beneficial to use that secondary display for that. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that back on. Now we started talking about adding in markers or using what's available to us inside of our source monitor. If we go ahead and look at the bottom of our screen, we're going to see many different options available to us. So we have the ability to add markers. And if you're not sure what each one is, hovering over it will allow you to see the tooltip. So we go and we add a marker. It's actually going to add a marker to the clip at any location that the playhead currently is at. So if I were to add a marker right now, you'll see there's the playhead, so it goes in and adds a marker in that location. If we go in, we right click on any marker, this is going to allow us to go in and decide what exactly are we doing with this. So we can edit the marker, we can clear all markers, we could ultimately just clear this selected marker too. So if I click on that, you'll see that that marker goes in and disappears. Over here we have our ability to set our endpoint or mark in, so it's going to set the endpoint based upon the current playhead. So this allows us to go and decide where this clip essentially is going to start. Next one over is our mark out, which sets the out point at the current playhead location. So anything after that is not going to be part of the clip. We go in and we actually start dealing with inserting and overwriting clips into our timeline. You'll see where these become important. The go to in is going to jump the playhead over to where the end point is at. If we go over here and we look at go to out, it's going to jump the playhead to the out point. And then we come over here and we look at insert. So as we start talking about edits, we'll talk about the two edits, insert and overwrite, and what each of these allows us to do. And the last one is the export a frame, which allows us to go in and create a still image file from whatever is displayed inside of the current source monitor. So those are the main controls. We already went through and talked about stepping back a frame, playing, and toggling ahead one frame. Those are all options available to us. And this is whether or not we're dragging video only or dragging audio only. As we go through and we start looking at more complex edits, we will get into that as well. So usually when we go through and we start working with stuff, we actually want to only include some specific parts of a clip inside of the sequence. So we're going to go through and choose what are those areas we want to have with that. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this back out from my maximize view. And in here we want to go back into this theft unexpected. Now, as I said, we can go ahead and toggle that open if that's what we want to work with it that way. Or we can also go ahead and hold down Command. And you'll see if we double click on there at the top here, it's going to give us now, instead of seeing just the project, we're now seeing inside of the bin. And this is our navigate up, which if we click on that, it's going to take us back up to the project panel. So as you start working with it, whichever method you're more comfortable with is fine to go in and use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here and we're going to use this excuse me, not the excuse me tilted, but the excuse me. And we'll simply go ahead and double click on that to allow it to open up inside of our source monitor. Now, anytime you go in and you start working with clips, I encourage you to go ahead and play it. See what it is you're looking at. Listen to the audio that's coming up. Just familiarize yourself with the content that's going to be in there. So we see that John walks in about halfway through the shot, and then he takes a little moment there to speak to someone. At this point, we haven't even looked at the other person. So let's go ahead and look at where we can position this play at. Now remember, we can click on this and we can drag left to right. Now, nice thing about it is once you start dragging, you're not constrained to just the width of the screen to be able to drag this across. As long as you keep moving left, it's going to keep going back. As long as you keep moving right, it's going to go and move forward. So what we're going to do is we want to pick a spot just before he sits down. So as we move this up, we can scrub through this. So as I click and drag, this is a scrubby setup. So what they're looking at us going to is the 154.14 mark. So let's go ahead and get to that position. This is where we see he's going in there and he's ultimately sitting down. So we know this is the part that we want to then cut away to see the other person or see another view a little bit farther out from him. So let's go ahead and at this mark, we're gonna go ahead and set this as the out. So we're gonna set our out point here, and I'm just gonna hit O to do that. And now I wanna go back and decide where exactly I want this to ultimately begin at. So where does he come in? So we're gonna scrub back. So he comes in here. So around 154.06 is we're gonna go ahead and set this as our endpoint, and we can do that by go ahead and pressing I. Now alternatively, we could use the mark in and mark out buttons. They would create the same thing. I encourage you to get used to using shortcut keys to ultimately speed up what is happening with this. Now, depending on your choice, some editors prefer to actually go through all of the available clips and decide the in and out points that they're going to begin with, as we will change as they keep going, as we fine tune items. And then other people like to go in and just simply create their in point, create their out point on a clip, and then go ahead and begin building their sequences. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and jump in and add ourselves a few different in and out points for a couple other clips. So as we start to look at it, we're reviewing the content, we're looking at what's there, deciding what shots we want, what areas we want out of each one of them. So let's go ahead and get a little bit more footage to work with. So let's go to the HS suit, and we'll go ahead and double click on that to load that up into our source monitor. Once we have this up there, we want to go ahead and position this just after John's line of dialogue in this. So right now we're going to have to back this up, because we're going into where he ultimately talks. So as we bring this back, it's right around 127. You can see he goes in and he looks up. So we're going at 127 and 16 frames. And let's go ahead and set this as our in point. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and press I. Then we want to add an out point just as John then moves across in front of the camera. So as we go through, we're going to grab a hold of this. We're going to go ahead and scrub this up. Just a couple seconds here, so you can see he's moving. So we're going to go into about 127.02.14. At this point, we're going to go ahead and set that as our out point. So we can see we got this little clip that's all of 1 second and 24 frames. Remember, the duration is in the lower right-hand corner of that source monitor. And then we're going to jump over to the mid-John clip. Go ahead and double-click that, so that's up here. And we want to go ahead and set our endpoint just as John's going to begin to sit down. So we're going to bring this across and watch for us to go until John comes in and just begins to sit down. So we're going to go ahead and take it at 139.52. And at this point, let's go ahead and set that as our endpoint. And then we're going to go in and allow him to sit down, and he's going to pick up and take a sip of tea. At that point, we're going to go ahead and mark our out point. So let's go ahead and scrub across here. So he's taking a sip of tea, and we're going to let him set the cup down and then move into his next action at 140.04. Let's go ahead and set that as our out point. So now we've gone in and we've set in points and we've set out points for multiple clips, which is going to allow us then to take these clips and we're going to be able to bring them in and begin to build ourselves a sequence. Now as we go through and we start working on clips and we start shooting stuff and editing things, we have to be aware of what exactly are we working with. So we start thinking about common shots and some of the abbreviations of them. So an extreme close-up, you may just see it saying ECU, close-up CU, head and shoulder HS, medium shot, maybe mid or MS. If we have a mid-wide or a medium-wide shot, it may show up as an MWS. Wide shots as WS, extreme wide EWS. We look at a two-shot. This would be two characters involved in the same shot. You may see listed as a 2S. A group shot GS, which would be a lot of characters involved. And then we start talking about cutaways. You may hear people start talking about B-roll footage. This is just stuff that is going to be captured that we're going to ultimately use later on for cutaways and also just to go in and start to give you ideas possibly of environments. Now at this point we've been working with clips. So as we look down here in the project panel, we're going to see that we're dealing with clips. So what does it look like? Well, that's the film strip that we have on there. But what happens when we go in and we start to work with subclips, or what exactly are subclips? So subclips essentially are just partial copies of a clip. So when you begin to work with clips, you may have smaller pieces of it that you're going to use. So that long shot, you're going to go in there and you have 3, 4, maybe 5 areas of that long clip you want to be using. So you're going to go ahead and make sub clips of them and place it in there. Now keep in mind, as you go through and start working with it, the sub clip reads off of the original file that you have in there. So you can't delete that original file or you're going to lose the main file along with all sub clips that are on it. So there's a couple notable characteristics related to sub clips. First off, they can be organized in bins and renamed just like any other regular clips, except for, as I mentioned, they do have a different icon to them. They have a limited duration based on whatever in and out points you use to create them. But as I said, they do share the same media as the original clips are based. So make sure you don't lose that. If so, it's going to show that the content is offline, which ultimately just means no media. And then you can also edit those and change their contents. And ultimately, if you wanted to, you could actually convert it into a full-length copy of the original clip. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a sub clip in here. So let's go into our Theft Unexpected bin. And in here, there's a cutaways clip. Let's go ahead and double click on our cutaways clip. So in this case, what we're looking at, they're going to reach in, they're going to grab the crackers, and they're going to remove them from the table. So if you want to look at it, we can go ahead and do a quick scrub just to see what's going to happen with this. So when we get up inside of here, as we're viewing this Theft Unexpected bin that is here, if we go ahead and come down here and let's go ahead and click on our new item, and we see options available. In this case, what we want to have is we want a new bin. So click on the new bin. And you're going to see inside Theft Unexpected, we get our new bin that pops up in here. Let's go ahead and call this sub clips, just so we can keep track of where these are at and what is inside of this. So let's go ahead and hold down Command. And we'll go ahead and click on our sub clips. It's just going to allow us to go ahead and open this up in that same frame. And let's go ahead and just choose an area of this clip so we can go ahead and turn it into a sub clip. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and the hand isn't in there yet. So we'll go 20405. Let's go ahead and mark that as our endpoint. They're going to reach in here and ultimately pick them up and take them away. And then place back the package with some missing. So let's go ahead and take that up to about 204.15. Let's go ahead and make that our out point. So what we have there between the in point and the out point is reaching in, picking up the crackers missing, placing it back down onto the table. So there's several ways we can go about making a sub clip. We can go ahead and we can right click on the picture that's up here. And inside of here, we can go ahead and make a sub clip, right here. We could also go ahead and while this panel is active, we can go to the top of the screen. We can say clip, make sub clip. Alternatively, over on the right, you're going to see there the Command U indicating to us that we can also press Command U to create one. The other thing we can also do with it is we can go ahead, while we're inside of here, we can hold down Command and we can drag this down into our bin down here and we can drop it inside of there. When we go through to work with any of these, what's going to happen is you're going to get your dialog box that's going to pop up talking about make sub clip. We're going to talk about restrict the trims to the sub clip boundaries. So with that, it's going looking at what we have in there for the boundaries that are set. For the name, we might as well go ahead and give it a name at this moment. So let's go ahead and call it packet moved. Then we can click on OK or hit return. Now what's going to happen is we have that new clip or sub clip created inside of here. We'll see those mark in and the mark out symbols with our clip and everything in between there. You'll also notice the film strip and the audio essentially looked apparently to be truncated, and that the fact that we don't see the left side of the film strip or the right side of the audio wave setup. So that's indicating to us we've just gone in and created ourselves a sub clip. Now as we start working with these, we know that we're ultimately going to end up coming over here and working inside of our timeline panel. Now our timeline panel, just think of that as your canvas. That's the creative spot where you get to go in and start to add clips, make changes to them, editing them, add special effects, transitions, mix soundtracks, add titles, graphics. All of the fun stuff really goes on inside of that timeline panel. So what we can do with that is anytime we're working in the timeline panel and the program panel work together with one another. Wherever the playhead is in the program monitor, it matches up within the timeline. Same thing, timeline into the program monitor. We start talking about the timeline. Timeline and sequence are going to be used interchangeably. The timeline is there with no sequence in it right now. However, when we start talking about that, we'll start talking about doing stuff in the sequence, doing stuff in the timeline. It's going to occur in that same locations. Now, if we go through and we add clips to a completely empty timeline like we have right now, what's going to happen with that, it's going to essentially ask you if you want to make a sequence that matches up with the clip settings. As we begin to work in the timeline, we can add any number of video tracks to it. Our preview playback is simply limited by what your computer is capable of doing. Anytime we go through and we start working with the video tracks, know that any upper video tracks appear in front of the lower ones. So as we go through and we start to work with it, you're going to find that you're going to begin to put your title bars, your graphics on the upper video tracks, and your other video is going to be on the lower ones. You can add any number of audio tracks. They all play at the same time, so we can go through and we can start to create our mix. We're dealing with music, dialogue, and special effects. You can change the height of the tracks in the timeline at any time. You can also go through and adjust the controls that you have on the tracks by adding things to the track headers. Time moves from left to right. It's always going to start over here and work its way to the right. You can zoom in and out on a sequence. So as you go and start working on things, if you want to get in there for real fine details, we can zoom in, we can zoom out. We can do the same thing even as we start working in our program source monitor. So this allows us to zoom what exactly are we seeing. You can see that the subclip then expands out so we can start to see each individual frame as we go through and work with that. So you do have those controls. The space between these two dots are the area that you're currently able to see, so you can drag that around as well. And then lastly, when we go through and we start looking at the buttons that are at the top of our timeline, these allow additional controls to them. Just like anything else inside of here, if you hover over top of it, you'll be able to see what's happening or what the tool actually is. And this is, of course, our settings to go through and work with. The other tools that are inside of here as well are sitting right here. These are tools that allow us to do different operations. Most of the time when we're working inside of here, you're going to find that the one that you're going to be using is the selection tool, shortcut V, which allows us to go through and grab stuff, drag stuff around, and select individual items. So when we go through and start working on a project, you can't actually have a project without a sequence because you need a sequence to go through and begin to build what it is that we are going to work with. So a sequence really is just a series of clips that play one right after another. It's going to play all the way across until there isn't anything else that is left on there. This includes multiple blended layers, could have special effects, title bars, audio to it, all the things that come together to make a complete video project. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a new sequence for this Theft Unexpected drama that we're putting together. So we come over here inside of our project panel, and what we're seeing is right now we're currently still in our subclips. So let's go ahead and navigate our way up. So we're back over here into the main project panel, or in this case will be the Theft Unexpected because this is what we're going to go into anyways. So if you went out to the main project panel, just go ahead and come back into our Theft Unexpected. And we want to go ahead and drag the excuse me that we have here onto the new item at the bottom of our panel. So let's come down here to the new item and we're going to drop that in there. So what you'll see then is it goes through and it creates us a new sequence over inside of the timeline that matches up exactly with what is there. If you already had a sequence open before you did that, when you go through and drag that into there, so if you happen to have open something else, you'll see that it simply gives you another tab across the top, allowing us to go in and we can select the one that says excuse me with it. So we also see that with this created automatically over inside of our Theft Unexpected bin, you will notice that that sequence is highlighted. Let's go ahead and rename that so it's not called excuse me. So we're going to right click on this. We can go ahead and we can select rename. So instead of it being excuse me, we're going to call it Theft Unexpected. After you hit return, remember it'll start moving through for renaming. You can go ahead and hit escape and that will just take it away from renaming the items that are there. Now at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on the left. So these are our headers. We talked a little bit about the header. If you go between those, you can drag up to expand what's there. These have different buttons available to us, different options inside of there. So as we drag it up, it will go through and work with it. We can also double click on it, which will allow us to go through and track that down. Now, why might we want to work with this? Well, as we go through and we start adding clips inside of here, we're going to want to be able to see what is there. This is the zoom. Again, we can go ahead and we can bring this back to start to see what's happening with this. The other thing is that we want to go in and be able to see what's going on with these. So as I drag this up, we're going to be able to then see a thumbnail. Based upon the height we have it proportionally, then we're going to have the ability to see what is inside of there. So if you want to see them, we can go and drag that up. Now we have a thumbnail in here to see what's going on. As we go through there and scrub across, you'll notice that the thumbnail doesn't change. That's essentially our poster frame, the first frame that's in there. But as we drag that across, you'll see that the playhead up here inside of the program monitor also moves to the right. It works in conjunction with the one in the timeline. If we bring this across, you're going to see that it moves in the other as well. As we go through and scrub across there, if you see on the lower right-hand side of your screen, you're going to notice that the audio goes up and down. That's because as you scrub, it is going to play any audio that is there. Now, if we want to go in and open up an existing sequence, we can simply go in to the bin and double click on the sequence. We could also go ahead and right click on the sequence. And with that, we can go ahead and tell it to open in timeline as well. So if we come in here, we can take any other ones and tell it to go ahead and open this up inside of the timeline. So open in timeline. In essence, if you also wanted to come in here, if you wanted to be working within the source monitor, you can also tell it to go ahead and open in the source monitor as well. But we don't work with our sequences up inside of there. Now, as I mentioned about sequences, there are multiple tracks to them. We have video, audio, in this case, audio 1, 2, 3 in a mix. We have video 1, video 2, and video 3. So if we come in here, we can, at any time, we can click on these to remove the audio. It's just simply saying that if we go and we place something later on, it's not going to go into that location. As you start to work with these video effects, can place those above if we're doing tile bars, things you want to see. So in this case, anything on video 3 will always play and be seen over video 2 and video 1. So as you start to place those, be aware of what you are placing, where you are placing it, and if something is missing, check the stacking order of your tracks. Now we go through, we start talking about targeting tracks. It simply means that we're going to go in here and say, if I place something, in this case on video 1, audio is going to end up on audio 2. So as we go through and we start highlighting these tracks, know where things are going. If things start ending up in different locations, then look at the headers to see as why it is doing that. Now, as we went and we began to work with things, so in the timeline panel, we can also have in and out points in a timeline panel. So we went through and we started talking about it inside of our source monitor. What we have in there is we're defining the part of the clip that you want to add to the sequence. We go through and we start looking at those in and out points. Really, they have two primary purposes. First off, it's going to tell Premiere Pro where, based upon a timeline, that we want a new clip to be positioned when we go through and we ultimately add it into the sequence. And the second thing it's going to tell us is to select the parts of a sequence that we want to remove. So as we start to think about what is it that we're working with, we can go through and we can define in and out points inside of the timeline, indicating areas that we want to go through and ultimately replace. So if I'm inside of either my timeline or in my program monitor, I set an in point, then we just drag it over here somewhere and we go ahead and set ourselves an out point. What you're going to see inside of the timeline is that now we have the highlighted portion that's being accessed. So if we go through to do something, it's going to happen to this area. If you look in the program monitor, what you're going to notice in the program monitor is that we also see those same in and out points. So it allows us to go in and work with them. Now, if we were to come up here to our program monitor, and up here I were to set the in point, scrub it across, and set the out point, notice that we have the same thing. So our in points and our out points show up in both of the areas. So if we go in here and we go ahead and select some areas in here, so let's just go ahead and set an in and out point, and then we start looking at our timeline. So our timeline down here, there's our in point and our out point. Same thing up here in the top. Well, once we go through and we set these, what happens when we go in and we want to go and remove what is here. Well, as we start to work with them, we can also come in here. If we go ahead, while we're on here, we press the X key. It's going to automatically go ahead and add us an endpoint at the beginning of our clip. So now we have an endpoint at the beginning of our clip. So if you decide, wait, I didn't want one where I was at, I can go ahead and I can place that into there. Now, if we go in here as well, we can go ahead and if we press Option O, it's going to go ahead and remove our out point. Now, since I still have an endpoint set at the beginning, you're going to see that it goes in and says, okay, you have an endpoint. You don't have an out point, so it automatically goes all the way through my clip so that everything was selected. Now, when I go ahead and hit Option I, it will remove that endpoint. Now, if we had our endpoint and our out point set, and we want to go ahead and just get rid of all of those, if we hold down Option and press X, that will quickly remove the endpoint and the out point. Get used to using those shortcuts, because what you're going to find is that you're going to be pulling stuff from a single clip. Once you get that set and you import that, you're going to go to a next area. You're probably going to go ahead and hit Option X to clear those so you can go ahead and set your new in and out points that are there. Now, you may start using the time rulers. Remember, the time ruler on the lower left in blue is our time code based on the clip. If we look over here inside of our program monitor, it's also blue, but this is based upon then the beginning of our sequence to the end of our sequence is going to be displayed into here. The lower right is duration of the program monitor and duration of the source file. So in this case, since we have an endpoint and out point, this is the duration of time between our endpoint and our out point. So as we go through and we start dragging, anytime I start talking about dragging, we're going to refer to this as scrubbing. So as we scrub through, what's going to happen is it allows us to go through and see what is inside of there. If you go and you start working with zoom, just remember that you have zoomed in. So as you add content, if we're zoomed in too far and you add content, it will go beyond the end of what's visible on your frame, which means you would have to come down here and click to drag this over and see it. Typically when I work, once it gets to the point where it goes outside of it, I will begin to adjust this so I'm seeing more of the content so I can still see exactly where my edits are going into. All of the headers inside of our timeline are capable of being customized. We can come up here to the little wrench and we can go ahead and come down here. We can choose either customize video header or customize audio header. We used the customized audio header before when we went in and added in our scratch track, making sure that we actually had the voiceover capability inside of the audio headers. So if we choose customize video header, these are all buttons that are available to us. If we go in and we grab a hold of one and we bring it down here and we drop it, you'll see it refreshes so that it's available to us. So as we drag these around, what's going to happen with them? Where's the content show up at here? If you go and move stuff on here, you don't like what's happening, we can hit reset layout. It will automatically take it back. So feel free to play around with those a little bit, see what happens with it. But at the end, I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel just so it doesn't apply any of the settings that are there. If you're not sure what a specific thing does, you can just go ahead and hover over it. It will give you the tooltip, letting you know what that item is inside of there. Now, as we go through and we start working, no matter how you go about adding a clip into your sequence, you're ultimately going to choose one of two kinds of edits. We have an insert edit and we have an overwrite edit. So as we go through and we start thinking about these, know that they will give you completely different results with the exception of being at the end of a sequence. So when we go through and we start looking at it and we start working with it, what you're going to start to find is that performing these edits are going to be the function that you're going to actually perform the most often. So this is the fundamental part of what nonlinear editing is. So far we have just one clip inside of here, and that's that excuse me clip that's in here. So let's go ahead and look at and use ourselves an overwrite edit. So let's go ahead and open up our HS suite inside of our source monitor. So this is when you came in there and moved across. What you should see is that you have our in point and our out point on here. If you wanted to see a little bit more of that, we could go ahead and adjust this, and you'll see then it goes in and automatically is going to scale it down. Notice it moved the playhead to the middle of the source. So you're not going to have to move this around constantly to try to get the portion that you're working with in the middle. It'll automatically take it to the center and begin to scale it down from there. So let's go ahead and position the playhead now inside of our timeline. Because remember, it's important that we've set up things up inside of our timeline so that when we go ahead and move our edit from our source into our program monitor or into our sequence, that it falls in the location that we want it at. So we're actually going to take this to the 4-second mark. Remember, we can go ahead and just key in 400 since it works from right to left as it moves those numbers inside of there. Now, once we have this set, we haven't defined an in point or an out point inside of our sequence, so it's by default going to go to right where that playhead is positioned. The playhead is sitting into the middle of it. Now, when we look over here at our source monitor, we see that we have video and audio, and that's because as we look at the buttons, both of these are illuminated, indicating to us that we have both of those items in there. So we want to go ahead and as we use this, we don't want to bring audio in. Now, we can drag that film strip down and we could drop it inside of there. The other thing we can also do is we can come down here and we can toggle off our audio track. So in this case, when I place it into there, I'm telling it I only want it to go to my video track that is here. So once we go through and we select turn those off, there's no longer going to put that audio down inside of there. So with that, let's go ahead and click on the overwrite button. So when we look at the bottom, we have our insert and we have our overwrite. We'll go ahead and we're going to click on overwrite and watch what happens to it. So when we go in and we click on that, it automatically splits the excuse me clip right where the playhead is. It inserts, it overwrites the item there. So as it goes in, it's saying right here's the end of this part. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write over it until the end of the HS suit. And then it automatically goes back to playing what was there on the excuse me one. So anything that falls between that 4 mark and our 524 mark has been overwritten. The audio remained. You see the audio has no breaks in it. The audio remained, but however, the video that ran during that period of time has been overwritten. So what can we do? Well, we can scrub and we can see what happens with that. So it comes up here. We see he's up there, talks, boom, looks at him. And then all of a sudden we jump back over as he goes in and decides he's ultimately going to sit down. So it goes over top of that. Instead of sliding it over, it goes over top of it. So we're going to go in then and add ourselves in an insert edit and see what happens with that. So let's go ahead and position the playhead at the very beginning. And we can go ahead and hit our home key since we see that we have our timeline highlighted. And it's going to move that all the way over to the left-hand side. You can play it and you can watch what's happening with this and see the clips go through over the course of its 8 seconds. So we go through the first clip. It's going to work up. He talks to him. It's going to jump. And then it's going to jump back. If we were listening to the audio, we'd hear the audio from the excuse me the whole time. If you look at our audio, there are no breaks here to match up with what we have for our video clip. So let's go ahead and add in some more to this. Let's go ahead and take this back to our 216 mark. So it's putting the playhead back over the excuse me clip. And let's go back into our theft unexpect. Let's open up our mid suit. Now once we open up our mid suit, we need to add ourselves some points to go off and work here. So we're going to go to the 1:15:46 mark and set that as our end point. We want just 2 seconds on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this to the 1:15:48 mark. And we're going to set that as our out point. Now we start looking at this. We are still dealing with where exactly are things going in here. So we're going in here and we want these items to then go in and target into video 1 and audio 1. So as you go in here and hover over it, it will talk to you as to what exactly you are going to end up doing with this. So I want this on video 1 and audio 1 because if I went down to audio 2, it would play both sounds. I don't want to play in both sounds. I actually want to go ahead and do an edit to the audio as well. And once I have that set, we're going to come up here to our insert from our source monitor. We're going to click on that, and then you can see there's a change to it. So now it actually cut there on the audio part, and it plays this audio from the mid-suit clip, and then it'll go back to the excuse me audio. The excuse me clip where it was at there got cut, pushed over to the right. So it's going to cut away momentarily so that we can see the fact of the sounds and that associated with the paper and the jacket, and then back to the excuse me. Then we jump back into the HS suit. So with that, it goes in, splits it, and slides those things over. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and save it. But as we begin working, what you're going to find is there's constantly going to be more work that we need to go in and continue to add to this to get the look that we want with it. So let's go ahead and jump back over in here. Let's open up the mid-John one. So there's the one we worked with before. There's the in and out clips that we went in and set up earlier. So we want to go ahead and position our playhead at the end of our sequence. Now as we go through, we can use the down arrow to jump to edit points, or the up arrow to go back towards the beginning of edit points. So I'm going to press down to get us to the end of our sequence. The other thing too, if you were dragging through here, if you hold down shift, you'll notice it snaps. So we'll snap to that part, so we could actually drag to the right. It will snap to it. You can let go of the mouse and then let go of the shift key as well. Now we have already gone in and set our in and out points on here. At this point, since we're at the end of a sequence, if we overwrite, we're overwriting nothing because there's nothing after it. And if we insert, once again, it's just going to drop it in there and write it to the right of the playhead. So you can choose whichever one you want for that. So if you want to click on it, in this case, I clicked on insert. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this a little bit so I can see, again, what I am working with here. If you had gone in and used overwrite, you're going to have the exact same results. So let's go ahead and insert one more clip inside of this. So we want to go ahead and take it and move this, the timeline back just before he takes his sip of tea. So it's around the 14-second mark. And we're going to open up that clip mid-suit. So here we have the mid-suit shot in the source monitor. We have our in and out points, in this case, that were in there before. So we want to go ahead and adjust what we think will go well between John sitting down and whatever he does for his first sip of tea. So as we come and we start to look at this, we can drag this up. So what is it that he's doing? As we're working with these, this is where we can go, and we can also work with some stuff that may not be exactly in line with what's taken place. Let's go ahead and set ourselves an endpoint of 1:15:55. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Option X, just clearing the old in and out points. So let's set that as our endpoint. And then we'll jump up to the 1:16 mark. Whoops. 1:16. There we go. And with that, we're going to go ahead and set that as our out point. So we went through and we replaced what was there. Now I cleared mine out. If you went in and set a new endpoint, it would replace it. If you set a new out point, it would replace the old out point. So anytime you go through and add a new one, it will automatically release what is there. By habit, I clear points as I go through and begin to work with them. So we're going to go ahead and add this into the sequence where it's at there, utilizing our insert edit. Now as we go through and we start to look at it, it may or may not be perfect. So let's go ahead and take this back to home. I'm going to save it. And we'll hit the space bar to go ahead and have the playback start to happen. So as we start to watch this, you watch your clips. As I said, later on we can fine tune anything that may not be perfect to you or may bother you as we go through and work. So it's going to continue playing through until we get to the end. We can see that this is 27 seconds and 4 frames long at this moment. Yours is probably close to that as well. So it goes through and plays, and it's going to stop there at the end. So that's what we've built so far. Now, what we've been doing right now is we start talking about 3-point editing. So when we go through and start to define 3-point editing, we're going to add a clip or part of a clip into a sequence. When we go to do that, Premiere Pro actually needs to know the duration and where and when we want to actually place something. So really what we have when we start looking at everything is a lot of times when we're working is we're going to be dealing with 4 points, so 2 in points and 2 out points. So an in point for a clip, an out point for the clip, an in point for where we want it in the sequence, and an out point for where we actually want it to end inside of the sequence. But the real truth as we go to work with it is we really only need to specify 3 of those. And then what happens with it is Premiere Pro, based upon the information that is there, calculates out where that fourth one should be at automatically and decides where to go in and place that. So this is what we would call 3-point editing. Now, as we go on and work, you may find that you start using 4-point editing, knowing that you want to go in and clear up these different areas. Now, as we go in and we start using 4-point editing, so we have an in point and out point in the source, an in point and out point inside of our sequence, we then have to make sure that either, first off, they're exactly the same length, or if they're not, what's going to happen is it's going to come up and ask you about fitting a clip inside of it. So when we start talking about that, it will come up and say either that your source is longer than the destination, or that the space in the destination is longer than source. As we work with that, you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to change the clip speed? So you're going to adjust it to fit to fill. Are we going to ignore the source in point, ignore the source out point, ignore the sequence in point, or ignore the sequence out point? So as we go through and start looking at that, the first one essentially says I'm going to conform whichever one, the source is shorter or longer, so I'm going to conform it to fit in the sequence. Or essentially what Premiere is going to say is you're telling it, ignore one of the points, essentially going back and doing yourself a 3-point edit. So those are all ways that we can go in and work with items inside of here, working its way up to 3-point editing. The other thing we can do is we can go in and we can utilize what's available to us in here to actually perform what we consider storyboard style editing. So building ourselves a storyboard using drawings, images, to decide exactly what the overall feel is going to be with it. And what we can do in here is we can utilize the freeform capability to go in and organize the clips in order and that we actually want to go in and use them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and come in here and do a file open. We're going to open up a little different project in here. So we have this lesson 05 desert sequence PROJ. Let's go ahead and open that up and click on OK. You may have to go in and find these. Once again, we're going to locate. This is why as we go through and work with them, we want to keep them in consistent areas so that we know how to simply follow what's up here leading over. We're in the desert setup. There's the 0001. And typically once you go through and build that, what's going to happen with it is it's going to find the rest of them. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that desert montage project inside of the project panel over there. Now once we have this up, I'm going to go ahead and save this a little differently. So I'm going to go ahead and do File, Save As, and we'll go ahead and call this Desert Sequence Working. So we're able to go in and see what's up there. Now, if you have a bunch of stuff in your source from the previous things that you were working on, you can just go up here to this and there it says close all. And when you do that, it goes ahead and throws out the clips that were currently sitting up inside of there, just if you don't want to see them. So inside of here, what we have is we have this new sequence. As we look at the new sequence, we see over here that there's audio to it. You can play the audio. You'll hear it go ahead and come in. The audio is going to play across there, and at the end, it's going to go ahead and drop itself back out. So what you'll also notice is that audio track 1 has been locked. So lock's turned on, which means we can't overwrite anything with audio on that. So if there's audio inside of any of the clips, that audio is going to be ignored as we come in and put it in, as long as we toggle off A2 and A3. So let's go ahead and arrange what we have for this. So we have this desert footage folder inside of here. Now what we're going to see is these are all the MP4s that are a part of it. We're going to come down here to the bottom to our freeform. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go ahead and maximize this view, which is going to allow me to see it in full screen. Remember, we can do that with the grave key or double clicking on where it says bin desert footage. Now inside of here, as it goes through to work, we can choose to go ahead and begin working with it just like this, or we can also click on the background and decide what do we want to do. Well, let's go ahead and take this and reset to grid based on name. So it's going to go ahead and adjust these across there. So now we want to go ahead and decide what do we want to do with these. We want to go ahead and drag these into position and put them in whatever order you want them to appear in the sequence. So as we start to think about what's happening with this, we're developing a storyboard essentially in here so that we can import that into our sequence in the order in which we have them placed. Now it's going to take them from left to right, top to bottom as we go through and organize these. So what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and decide, what do you want? I mean, how do we want to start this out? Let's just drag them into whatever order you decide. And then once you're happy with what is here, so we have these all moved around, we're positioned in the order we want them to be in. So what we want to do is we want to take these clips then and we want to bring them into a sequence. So we have that sequence that we already have inside of there. I'm going to go ahead and toggle this back down. So what we have inside of here is these are still all arranged in the way that we had them set. So we're going to make sure nothing's selected inside of here. We're going to hit Command A. That's just going to go ahead and allow us to select all of our clips. So now all the clips are in here. It also recognizes where they're at inside of that bin. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take these. We're going to drag these into here. Now you'll see what's happening. As I'm dragging them in, what's happening is that the audio is going to go down there on audio track 2. So what I want to be able to do is I don't want to have that audio inside of there. So if I go ahead and toggle these off and I take these and bring these out here, it's still bringing them in. It shouldn't bring those into my clip, but these are into here. I don't want the audio that's back there, so we're going to ultimately have to go in and take out what is there. So we're going to go into the clips and make it to where we're no longer hearing the audio that is available to us. But this is a quick way to go in and move items into here. So if I want to get rid of my audio, I can hold down Option, drag up, get those. I can hit Delete on there as well. So that's one way to go in and quickly get rid of the audio. I could also go in and toggle off the fact that that's even going to be playing. But right now, I'll remove that. If you go ahead and play it, so we go back to home and play it. This is one of those situations where we talked about what's going on with free form inside of there and the ability to go in and use it. And that's one of the main places that we would go about using it, is we can set up, move those around much easier inside of there and build ourselves an order to it. At this point, all of those were MP4 files. If they weren't MP4 files and we had still images, you can define how long are these still images going to be inside of Premiere by coming up here into our preferences, and we go in here to our timeline. This is where we decide how long do we have. Still image duration defaults 5 seconds. So if you want it to be 3 seconds, you can change that to 3, and any still image that gets placed inside of anything will actually be that length. So as you can see, as you start working with the files and working with what's available to you, you can see that where you start to gain the power of that. And that's all about mastering the essentials of video editing. What we just did are the things that we are going to be doing over and over and over again. As we continue working with it more, we will get into working with clips and markers a lot more, and you'll become more proficient with them. So that there is mastering the essentials of video editing with Premiere Pro.